in judo, you can use muscle or leverage to execute a technique. So there is a meeting and a conflict when a judo technique happens. In Aikido, your technique always starts from an evasion. Like you're always pivoting offline, you're pivoting back. You know, the number one thing in Aikido is if an attack is there, you are not.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations from the Heart. Today, we are joined by Senseis Nick and Alex Gaudynski from Wisconsin Sport Aikido Club up in West Allis, Wisconsin. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you
for having us.
So I met you guys in a really transformative period in my life back when I was in college, and that was just such an amazing experience. Met some amazing people. You guys are definitely on the top of that list. But we kind of, have parted ways for a long time. I think it's been, guys, maybe 10, 15 years. It's been a long time.
About that, yeah.
And it's great to see you again, and I kind of want to know what you've been doing these last few years, but also how you got started originally in the martial arts. Because I know when we met in karate, you guys had trained in Aikido before. And I think that's going to be the central topic for today, is talking about Aikido and kind of filling us in. Can you tell us how you guys got started? Is it the same story? It might be a little bit different, so you guys can take turns. And
it's pretty much the same story, Nick. If you want to start it off, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, informally, we started kind of, backyard karate. We had a friend that was a little bit older than us, and he actually was at UWM taking karate with Phil Sauer there. So we kind of started with him just in the backyard goofing around, and I think it was 1991, 92, we kind of said, well, we'd like to do martial arts as well, but we didn't want to do the run-of-the-mill sort of like commercial brand. So we kind of did a little bit of research, and we came across this Aikido thing at the YMCA, and we didn't know much about Aikido at the time, but of course the most probably most famous practitioner is probably Steven Seagal, the guy, movies, swinging sticks and cue balls and whatever inside of a towel. So we said, well, we'll give it a shot. And so we started that in 1992 at the YMCA under Mark Bartram and the Midwest Yadanchiga there. We've stuck with that. We're still practicing that consistently. AJ and I both have a fourth dan in Tamiki style Aikido. When we went to college in roughly 1996, we looking to expand it. Aikido is very defensive, kind of absorbing attack, and we both said, well, we want to complete our training a little bit and supplement it and get a little more stand-up. So we started Shorin-ryu karate with Phil Sauer at Kimai Nabati in 1996 when we started college, and we kept with him for a number of years. Post-college, we've both done a number of years in judo, probably Kodokan judo, probably 6 or 7 years, and then dabbled here and there, Qigong, nothing long-term, but, a couple months here, a couple months there, and just kind of picked up where you kind of along the way. But the Shorin-ryu, the Aikido, and the Kodokan judo probably were our longest tenured martial arts and probably our three principal.
That is so interesting. That's awesome. And the same thing for you, Alex? Very similar?
Yeah, very similar, yeah. So, I mean, we were both in, as you mentioned, Aikido long enough to get fourth degree. I think we both got third degree in Shorin-ryu. Before I kind of transitioned away from judo for various, time and effort and energy reasons, I think I was at, I was at a second degree brown. So yeah, all very similar. If I'd still be doing all three if time and energy were not factors in life,
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
sir.
I mean, you guys have your own school, right? The Sport Aikido Club. Is that what you're running now?
Yeah,
Correct.
so we manage it. It's a very small club that we run with another gentleman named Matt Fanning, who is was actually kind of a contemporary coming up through the ranks through us. He's currently a rank below us, and we came up through the same Aikido instructor. And there was a period of time where kind of we went and did our own thing, and he went and did his own thing, and then I forget how it happened. I think, but we reconnected probably 6-7 years ago. And I think he reached out because he was starting a rec program, and he's like, "Hey, I'd like it if you guys, come to class and share what you guys know." And we kind of started working with him with the rec program. I don't know if you guys have worked with rec programs, but sometimes they, equipment and stuff are always kind of iffy at best.
I ran a club at UWM. I know all about how hard that is. My God, space was like fighting a battle,
Yeah. But an opportunity came up to kind of start our own little group away from the rec program, and we kind of jumped at it, and we put our own money to buy equipment and mats and all that stuff, and we've been there for 4 or 5 years now.
That's
I think
awesome.
3.5 or 4, yeah.
Now, are you guys keeping it just strictly Aikido? Because you do have a lot of other training with the karate and the judo. Do you guys integrate that at all, or?
Some, we'll do some private sessions here and there. It's mainly strictly Aikido, due to insurance purposes. Obviously, you guys are aware of that.
Yeah.
We'd like to expand, but the logistics of it just make it difficult.
Okay.
We're doing classes 2 nights a week, and it's like you have to find the people with the time and energy to add another 2, and then outreach and all that stuff. I mean, for now, we're just doing Aikido. I would love to expand it, but that's kind of, we'll see where life takes us within the next couple of years.
Yes, sir.
I was gonna say, the great thing about having your own school is you can do anything you want, and if you want to do the karate and the judo, you can just teach your students and keep practicing yourself, which is what I've been doing. I haven't trained. I left Phil Sauer, a long time ago, back when we were training together, but I still practice those karate things all the time on the floor with my students, and that's the great thing about having your own school.
Yeah.
It's funny if you don't practice a while and you just bust out a kata or 2, how much you'll actually recollect, just off of muscle memory. You did it so often for so long that it just comes back to you pretty quick.
Oh man, those short katas are so awesome. I love them. I mean, I did Taekwondo my whole life, and I have to admit that short kata is just way better. It's just karate katas are the best.
They were fun, and that's, and that's what I think I enjoyed most with Shorin and Aikido. They were so different, just in philosophies and practicalities and practice methods. I mean, they balanced out really well, and they complement each other well. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people, they don't really know a lot about Aikido, and one thing you have to understand about Aikido and its primary philosophy is there is no offense in Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is primarily defensive that turns into offensive moves.
Mm-hmm.
And with karate being an offensive-driven art, 50% offense, 50% defense, they blend really well, and I think that's what I gravitated toward and what I enjoyed the most.
You're like the emptiness of water and the crashing wave.
Yeah.
Together. Yeah, that's awesome. So would you say, to start our conversation on Aikido, would you say that that's kind of the foundational principle of Aikido is martial arts only for self-defense in that sort of non-aggressive, non-attack, mode of thinking?
I think that's definitely a distinguisher of Aikido. Aikido in its traditional sense, there's no attacking, there's no offense, and traditional Aikido doesn't necessarily practice free sparring or competition. That's one area where the style we study, Tamiki Aikido, actually differs. There's still no offense, but there is various forms of free sparring and competition. There's knife competition and there's empty hand competition. So it's more akin to judo in that sense.
Okay.
But in traditional Aikido, that's really kind of the separator, is that it really is a defensive art first and foremost.
Gotcha. And how is, I don't know anything about Aikido, so you gotta help me here, but how is Tamikio Aikido different from other forms of Aikido?
Yeah, so I give you a real kind of footnote or cliff note history here. So Morihei Ueshiba, founded Aikido 1910s, 1920s, somewhere around there. And he initially founded it as more of a Budo, right? Like it was kind of a way of life, a very harmonious, approach to things. He taught it as a traditional martial art. There wasn't necessarily a set curriculum. He ran his own schools. He kind of went here, there, taught his students. He identified the ones that kind of perpetuated the style and grasped toward it, and he promoted it that way. Kenji Tamiki was initially a judo player. He was studying under Jigoro Kano. And they, Jigoro Kano kind of said, hey, who's this Ueshiba guy? What's he doing? And he sent Kenji Tamiki over there to kind of start to learn and study. And he did, and he became one of the higher ranking students. He was Kenji Tamiki was a 8th dan in both Aikido and Judo. And post World War II, what generally happened is, just because of kind of the hostilities and the U.S. involvement, martial arts were outlawed as the practice of Budo, right? But things like Judo were still allowed to happen because it was a competition, it was a sport. So Kenji Tamiki, who was a Judo practitioner and a physical education teacher at Waseda College, said, well, let's bring in a sport aspect. Let's keep this going by making it a sport. And what he did is he took the 15, there were 15 core techniques from Aikido, and he broke them down into kind of their simplest forms. One, to propagate it as a competition with set rules and programs and things like that. And from there, he instilled two general practices of sport. And one was, as Alex was mentioning, Tanto Randori, which is Randori or competition against a knife, or Teikatana Randori, which is hand-to-hand. Those 15 techniques initially, eventually turned into a basic 17. And that's kind of where Tamiki style is today. But Tamiki style is singular in the sense that it's only style Aikido with competition. Most of your traditional Aikidos won't have competition. They won't have Randori, and it's a very cooperative sort of approach to practice.
Is that why you guys run the Aikido Sport, the Sport Aikido Club?
Right.
You say
Correct.
Sport Aikido? Interesting, because I was trying to figure that out, because I didn't know Aikido was really into sport, because like when I had heard of it before, I thought more martial arts, but that makes sense now with what you're saying. How does that, you guys did Judo as well, and that seems so interesting to me, because listening to the history of the Aikido you do, it seems like you guys would be pretty well versed in Judo. So when you got on the mats and started doing Judo, you must have been kind of wiping the floor with those white belts.
I don't know. There's some pretty good white belts out there, I'll be honest.
Yeah. How is it different? How is the Judo training different than the Aikido training you did?
So, and AJ, you can kind of jump in, or if you have different. So Judo, the throws and bars in Judo are, I'll describe them as whole body. So like if you do an Ippon Nagi, which is kind of a over the shoulder throw, you're throwing the entire body, or you're doing Osotogari, where it's a leg sweep, and you're taking the whole body down. Where Aikido is, you're throwing, but it's from an R bar, it's from a wrist lock, it's from a point of articulation, as opposed to two forces. So Judo is very much kind of two forces meet, and you try to jockey for position and get one way or the other. Where Aikido, you're waiting for that person to overcommit and then steal Kazushi or steal balance and then apply your technique.
Yes, sir.
So also some kind of differing rules there. Judo.
This is a Go for it. Keep going. Sorry.
I'll just say, judo, in competition, you can grab the sleeve, you can grab inside the collar, inside the gi. Aikido, you're kind of restricted to the arm. You can't come inside the collar or anything like that to perpetuate a throw.
Oh. Well, like one, I guess this may or may not be true, but one casual observation, just by seeing Aikido and Judo and thinking about things, is like, it almost seems like Aikido is a little bit more on the outer periphery and more using footwork to off balance people, whereas Judo is a little bit more like get in there, get control. We're not quite the wrestling level where we're going for like the double legs, single legs, but getting full body control, loading them up on your hip and really tossing them over, as opposed to, like off balancing them from a distance and out footworking them. Would you say that's kind of true?
Yeah, no, that is very true. It's very astute. So judo in and of itself is, I think, as you kind of both alluded to, it's I don't want to say confrontational, but for lack of a better term, it involves actually jockeying a position for dominance and position. So in judo, you can use muscle or leverage to execute a technique. So there is a meeting and a conflict when a judo technique happens. In Aikido, your technique always starts from an evasion. Like you're always pivoting offline, you're pivoting back. The number one thing in Aikido is if an attack is there, you are not. So you're moving off to the side, you're moving back, you're parrying around your opponent. So that's one of the primary differences. Again, with Aikido, after your pivot, you then reposition where you are taking more of a judo distance, where you're closer, or what's depending upon from the outside. But again, Aikido, back to that defense first. Your technique always starts with an evasion.
Another observation I've had is Aikido, a lot of times when I see it practice, it starts from a strike, like someone comes in with a punch, whereas I see Judo typically practice, they start with grips. And that's actually kind of makes Aikido a really nice pairing, I feel like, with the karate that you guys studied in the past, because it's like, now you know how to throw a good punch. Because sometimes you see Aikido guys and don't really know how to throw the punch, but they know what to do with the punch. So you kind of learn the punch and then you learn how to intercept it. My question is, and I've never seen sport Aikido, how does that look? Because I would imagine like a lot of the training Aikido I've seen is like someone comes in and throws a punch at you and then you react, right? But are you guys throwing punches? How are people initiating in sport Aikido?
So there's two randores or two sparring kind of philosophies. The first one is tanto randores. Tanto is a practice knife. And what happens is you have your two opponents. One person will have the tanto or the knife. The other person is defending. And
both that sounds really hard.
Yeah, so both sides can get points. So initially, tanto or uke, they generally can score a point by stabbing and thrusting and making the knife bend with somewhere between the shoulders and obi level. But it's got to be a straight thrust, and the knife's got to bend, and you can get a skiari or 1 point, during that round. And then as Tori defends, very similar to judo rules, they have to apply a technique. They're trying not, obviously you're trying to soft block, you're trying to pivot, apply your technique, and then you score one of, Ipan, which is 4, Wazari, which is 2, or Kokyu, which is usually 1. And then what happens is halfway through, which is about a minute and a half, you switch and then you alternate and go back. So Tegatana Randuri is probably, if for the uninitiated, if you're watching a judo match or a Tegatana Randuri Aikido match, they're going to look very, very similar, because you start hand blade to hand blade, and it becomes more of a grappling, and it's finished when one person is thrown.
Okay.
And again, the subtleties are, again, you can't go inside the gi, you can't, there's no leg sweeps. So it's trying to apply your technique from a standing position from hand blade to hand blade, but there is a kind of a lot of, hand motion, blocking. One of our techniques is called a shomanate, or just a kind of front hand throw. So there's a lot of just kind of hands flying in the face and, things like that. So the Tegatana is probably more akin to a judo competition than the Tanto Randori.
Gotcha. I'm curious. So I'm imagining this. I've seen some Aikido videos, right? But again, I mean, like Master Rolls, I was really kind of hungry for this conversation because I want to hear it kind of from people who have been doing this for a long time. You mentioned not being able to come up inside the gi and kind of like that. And it makes me curious because when we're, for example, rolling, we are like getting deep grips. We're trying to really use the gi to our advantage. And then it makes me think of no gi rolling or no uniform. And I'm curious, do you ever do training or practice without the gi? And what does that look like? I don't know, I'm just curious about that.
We do during the summer when it's too hot to wear them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But I mean, the transition is pretty standard because, as Sensei Nick was saying, it's, because you can't actually grab the fabric, what actually happens, you end up grabbing the wrist or the forearm, or the arm area here. You can't ever actually like grab fabric, but you can put your hand where it needs to be, and that's one of the exercises with Aikido is hand grip strength. So you really work on your hand grip strength, and it really is controlling that wrist or that forearm so you can pull your opponent where the leverage is required, and then use that free arm to execute a throw.
In some ways, that's really applicable because, I mean, you might find someone in a jacket, but a lot of times they're going to be in street clothes. So it seems like Aikido is sort of primed to teach you how to really work with the human body in ways that, like, sometimes, with Judo, I studied Judo for a while and I've done Jiu-Jitsu for a long time. And, we get our grips in, and it's like, I love it when you're working with a newbie because, like, you just have full control of this person. You can just manhandle them. Whereas, like, when you do no-gi, they can jump around and get all sweaty and try to, like, evade and stuff. And sometimes I think they're a lot better than they really are. But when you get those grips in, they're just hopeless, Right, and
yeah.
But that all said, it's not always the most realistic. And learning the no-gi is also really important. It seems like that's almost built into Aikido.
Yeah, and you're 100% accurate. And just with my experience coming up through the ranks, like, as you learn Aikido, like, that's one of the most frustrating things is some of the techniques. They're very difficult to apply at first until you learn the foundations. Like, it's Aikido is kind of like golf in a sense that it's like you can go out and you just have the worst day of your life, but then you have one swing, you're just like, oh, that was sweet, I'll keep going. That's Aikido.
Nice. Yes, sir.
What kind of uniforms do you guys wear? Do you wear like lighter karate style, or do you guys wear like a thicker Judo uniform?
It tends to gravitate more towards the Judo uniform.
Okay.
And again, because a lot of the defensive things you do, you are, even though the techniques you complete in Aikido aren't from a grab or a grasp like a lapel or whatever, some of the defenses and formal katas or koryus, we call them, that they will have those type of grabs and setups. So it tends to be more of a Judo or a heavier gi.
Yeah, yeah.
With those, you say Koryu is the term for form?
Yeah, so Koryu is just, I don't remember what the exact translation is, but it kind of, I think
it's like a practice set.
Yeah, it's like a traditional set. So there's, Koryu Daichi, which is, formal set number 1, Koryu Dai Ni, which is formal set number 2, and then so on and so forth.
And does that translate as, in terms of motion, because, we have our kind of Taekwondo forms, like our Pogways and our Teguks. Is it a matter of you start in a position, are all of the forms done with another person?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So that's, I guess, another kind of difficult part about Aikido is you can do the motions, by yourself, but you can't perfect them, right? Taekwondo, you can work your kicks, and you're targeting, and you're chambering it, and you're hitting the target, you're working the bags. You can run through the forms in Aikido, but the issue is when you're working with balance or inertia or trying to break someone's, take them outside their center and apply your technique from a point of strength, it's going to differ from person to person, right? I can't apply a technique against somebody who's 4 foot and 300 pounds the same way I would be able to apply it to somebody who's 6 foot and 150. It's just a different setup and a different mentality. So hard to practice Aikido without a partner.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of a humbling thing too, though. I mean, it shows that you can only learn through camaraderie and friendship with other people. Man, when I hear about these like sort of katas in Aikido, how long are these? Like, are they sort of like a defense? Like we teach like self-defense moves, like someone comes in and strangles you, and then maybe you move to the side, you take it down, you do like an arm bar or something. That would be like one self-defense. Is that like one kata in Aikido?
So there's Aikido it has 17 basic techniques. And then we practice those techniques again with a partner. There's a kata form, which is like kind of the fundamentals where you're doing safe practice and safe speed. And then you elevate to like randori kata and then full-fledged randori, which is kind of free form. The koryus of themselves vary. So there are, to my recollection, about 7 koryus right now. And they're basically, each one is a collection. So one we do very often, the Koryu Daisan, which is the third practice set, is, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, 24 techniques?
I think 34 techniques.
34 techniques. And there's always a progression to the stylization. So with the Koryu Daisan, you start with what's commonly referred to as tea house technique. So you're doing kneeling to kneeling like you would be being attacked in a tea house in Japan. So you're at the tea table, you're both kneeling at a table, and someone tries to attack you, and then you respond accordingly. Wow. You then elevate to kneeling to standing, where someone is kneeling in a tea house and somebody attacks them from a standing position. Then you go to standing to standing. Then there's like 5 against knife, 5 against stick, like 6 with stick, and then sword on sword.
Cool. Wow. It's a lot of curriculum. It's awesome. Yeah, I mean, over the years, this is a sort of a side note, but you guys have done so many martial arts too. Like, it's just hard to remember all that stuff. It's impressive. I mean, that's just your Aikido. Then you got all those like 16 karate forms that we learned, and then all the judo stuff. I mean, your head must just be swimming.
I can't tell you how beneficial YouTube has been in recent years.
Oh yeah, but then the problem is people think they really know it and they don't know it, because they have a huge database. They can basically learn anything on the fly, and they think they know it. But then when they go to really roll or do randori or whatever you want to call it, they really don't know anything, and so they have a false sense of understanding.
Yeah, and
it's like a book, there's so many people that want to be, they publish the techniques or whatever, and books are great, but it's not a substitute for instruction. It's a reference, and it's always going to be a reference, but the instruction still has to be there and the practice still has to be there.
Absolutely.
So off of that, hearing about your training in Shorin Ryu, I am curious, we kind of hinted at this a little earlier, but I don't know if we went kind of deeply into it. Is there a specific philosophy, a specific technique, a specific mindset that you feel really becomes complementary with these two styles? You have Aikido, you have Shorin Karate. Is there something that you feel, either one of you or both of you together, I know you've done a lot of your training in tandem, that you've brought from your karate training into your Aikido instruction and practice, and then vice versa? When you are practicing karate, are you pulling something really specific from your Aikido training and trying to inform your karate through that? That might be a little...
No, I think I get where you're going. So I think at its fundamental core, Shorin Ryu and Aikido are both soft blocking styles, meaning you're not, attacks come in and you're not locking down in the center, right? You're moving offline and you're redirecting or whatever it is. And
yes, sir.
I think since we started with Aikido, which is almost exclusively soft blocking and moving and pivoting,
Sure.
transitioning to Shorin-ryu, which was also soft blocking style, just made sense. And I remember taking some initial classes where you do a defense against the punch, and the first step is move out of the way and block, and just people were like, I don't get it, and I was like, well, you just move out of the way, like
let me show you.
You're here, I want to be over here, like it's like
it seems simple, but it's not.
right. But it was that practice in Aikido that I think allowed that assimilation in a Shorin-ryu a whole lot easier. And then even in Shorin-ryu, I think just taking somebody's balance just slightly to apply your technique was a big thing, right? Because I think a lot of people, they would move out of the way, they'd get that, but then they would rely on just your punching or your chambering or whatever. There wasn't kind of a dynamic disruption of their attack, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they'd move off and they would a soft block, but it never arrested or it never redirected your opponent's attack. So I think just enough to off balance him and then apply your technique made a big difference in the Shorin-ryu. And I think those are both complementary to our initial Aikido practice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we did a lot of blocking in that program. It's one of the things that I feel like I learned the most about in the Shorin-ryu program from coming from a Taekwondo background. We don't do a lot of blocking. Like, we mostly evade. And so I had really good footwork and body movement, but then I get in there and I try to do my block and, I'm coming all straight up with my arm and not coming out and intercepting things, and I'm getting hit in the face, and I'm like, oof, okay, I got to learn this, but it was great because it really filled in my game. And then I went back to Taekwondo tournaments and someone roundhouse kicked me out and I blocked it, and they're not expecting it, and then right away you hit them,
You're going to competition, you're like, wait, you can't do that, can you?
I didn't know that was possible, because a lot of Taekwondo people think it's impossible to block. They're like, yeah, you can't actually block things. And then I would block all their stuff, and they'd be like really confused, But it was only because we used to do block punch every single day,
I can't tell you how many times in that program, I would leave with just my forearms bruised, my hands shaking.
There was one lady, I can't remember her name, but she was fierce. She was super fierce. I think she had pink or purple hair or something, and she would come in there, she was in her 40s. And every time I go to block her, her arm was so tight, it was like a piston, and I didn't want to chicken out, and say hey, let's calm it down, because she's half my size. So I just had to sit there and block her ridiculous punches. But man, I would grit it and bear it and pretend like I was okay, but I'd leave there and I'm like, oh my God, my forearms, this lady. I'm sure in her mind, she was like, I can't show any weakness. And she probably left feeling the same way too, It's so funny. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say it was always the best, trying to, especially when it was in college, you'd leave and you'd have to go take notes in your next lecture class, and your hand's shaking, and you can't hold a pen because you're just bruised up.
Yeah. Man, it was such a great time in my martial arts development, I feel like, when I was in college, because I was training in so many different disciplines. I was training karate, but I was training all over the place there at UWM, and I have my own program over there in my club and whatnot. And young college students, it just is such a great time in their life where they're passionate and they're ambitious, and that's the time to do martial arts, I feel like, if there's ever a time, because martial arts is all about passion, and ambition, and believing in yourself, and having confidence. And those are good days. And I owe a lot to Sensei Phil Sauer for what he taught me and stuff. He was a very good martial artist, I feel like, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I agree. College was great because you had so many people from so many different backgrounds and styles, just all conveniently in one place. You didn't have to search too far to get the knowledge.
It's so crazy. I graduated from college, and then I went to Korea, and I did meet just amazing martial artists in Korea. But I expected that. But then, when I opened my school and I started building my business, I started to realize that you guys, me, you know, Aaron Kopish. There was a lot of really good martial artists in that small group.
Yeah.
That I didn't realize how great that group was until I moved on to other things. I was like, man, there's some real talent there.
Yeah. And actually, like, it's funny you mentioned that, because before I left that program, left college, like, Bill actually made mention of the exact same thing you just said. He like mentioned the exact same people. He's like, you guys are really good. And like, I don't know, me in my 20s, I'm like, you're just saying that because we're your students. He's like, no, like, you have no idea how much talent you have compared to what's out there.
Oh yeah.
Well, like, thank you.
It was like this. It was kind of, you meet these different pockets of martial arts, you know, and there's like the kind of the mainstream martial arts, and then there's these like little pockets of like badasses that just somehow glom together and just been doing their own thing in like the shadows of society for like 30, 40 years. That's what this was. Now, Phil Sauer had been like training these people. Some of them been like going back to the college that he graduated from UWM.
I think so, yeah.
Or he went there. He started a long time ago. But these people were coming back, and like there were these like 50-year-old guys that were training with us. That been training with him for like 30 years in that program. And he, you know, maybe he got a little bit into the money, but honestly, like my opinion, he really wasn't. Like he was just teaching for the love of it, and his program had some great martial arts because he didn't really focus on the business side of it like he could have, you know. And all those people were like in the prime of their lives, a lot of the college students, so they're just primed to be good naturally. You know, you look at a kid who's like 6 and 7 years old, and they really haven't figured out how to use their body yet, let alone start using it as a weapon. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny too that kind of just in, as you mentioned, just in that pocket, you know, even among the pocket, you know, there was pockets, right? Like, you know, you always had those people that you worked with, and it wasn't that you liked them better than anybody else, but they elevated you, right? Like they challenged you, like, and there was that that mutual kind of pushing where somebody who, you know, was good, but maybe at this level, you know, you could work out with, but they never helped you elevate. And I think that's one thing that happened in just that pocket where you just had people that were driven. And, you know, here we are 20 years later, you know, three of us talking. I know you've had other students in the past that are still doing it. Like that drive remained. I mean, it's not hard to find somebody who's practiced martial arts. It's hard to find somebody that's continued to practice martial arts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very few people. How long have you guys been training? You guys like a long time, huh?
It's close to 30 years, 20 since 92. So
wow. So that's a long time. Very few people make it past a few months, you know, and some people make it like a year. You see a big drop off after about 9 months.
Yep.
We've had about 500 people come through our school since we opened about 5 years ago. And I would say, I think we've got 9 red belts, you know, like that's it is not many, you know. We got 2 black belts. That's it. And everyone else just kind of dropped off, you know. The people come in, they try it out, they get a couple ranks or something, but very few people commit to life. But I feel like once you get like kind of, you know, 5 or 6 years in, something clicks, your entire identity is like associated with martial arts. And sometimes you see these people that just, they've been bouncing around, but they'll never give up martial arts for the rest of their life. Yeah.
Yeah, we do the same thing. Like people will come in and, you know, they'll stick with it for a year, 2 years. You know, some people will, you know, they want to get to that black belt level and then they're done. Like,
yeah,
I'm at black belt, I've reached the pinnacle. But then you get the few like pure souls are just like, all right, I got black belt. What's next?
Yeah.
Because once you get to that black belt level, like it sounds kind of cliche, but that's really where the learning begins. Like that's where it gets fun.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of people think that a black belt is an expert, but black belt's just the beginning, guys. That's like where you know the basics and you can go out and start competing and developing your skills and really becoming an expert. Like, and it's just a shame that a lot of people get there and then they just like, okay, I'm done. I accomplished this, you know. No.
Well, not only that too, but like, you know, at that level you start instructing, and it's like, I tell our students all the time, I'm like, well, you think you know a technique, now try to teach it.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to learn more teaching that technique than you ever think you would just practicing it.
Yeah. 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 We got defenses and we got forms that we teach, and you teach a form and the kid's like, yeah, I got it. Cause he can like kind of walk through it in like, 45 minutes, he can complete his whole form, so he thinks he actually knows it. It's like, no, you don't know it until you can do it fast. Every stance is exactly the same. Power, complete focus. You'll never know it completely, but it's so funny. You see these kids and they're like, how do you feel like you know your form? And they're like, yeah, I know it. And I'm like, no, you don't know it at all. You don't even have it a little, Same thing with the defenses, like they're like, yeah, I got it. It's like, okay, now defend yourself in this real situation. I like grab them, and they're like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Was it Bruce Lee that said it takes 10,000 repetitions just to become proficient?
Yeah, I think something like that, right?
At 10 to 10,000 to master a move. So it's like, yeah, you did it twice and it looks okay, but yeah, you're not there yet.
That's what I tell my students every time. They're like, yeah, I know this wrist grab defense. I'm like, you gotta do it 10,000 times. Have you done 10,000 times? Like, no.
Yeah. Well, and that's like the wrist grab thing that you mentioned. Like, that's the same thing with Aikido, and like what Nick mentioned earlier. It's like, okay, you know it. You can do it on this guy. Well, now go work out with this guy who's 200 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
But it's going to be different. You don't know it if you can't. You don't know it if you can't apply it effectively to different body types.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Coming back to instructors for a moment, there was a little bit of conversation there about these instructors that have impacted you throughout your training. I'm curious, this show is, it's for students, it's for martial artists just across the country, across the world, but it's also for fledgling instructors or, veteran instructors alike. And my question that I like to ask a lot of the guests is, what is your advice to a new instructor or to somebody who, as you said, Sensei Alex, you can practice martial arts your whole life, but the second you get out there in front of a class of 7-year-olds or a class of 77-year-olds, whatever it is, there is an entire world of learning available to you in a new way. So for both of you, is there any specific advice that you would?
My best advice to anybody teaching anything is don't be afraid to admit that you messed up or made a mistake. Like, I've worked with instructors where it's like they're doing something and like you're watching, it's like they're doing it wrong and they know they're doing it wrong, but they don't want to admit that they're doing it wrong. So they're just going to keep teaching you the way they're teaching you. Don't be afraid. Like, don't have your pride so heavy that you can't start something and do it and then be like, you know what? That was incorrect. Let's do that again.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, that's great. What about you, Nicholas? What's like some advice you give a fledgling instructor?
Probably along the same lines, but it's just don't be afraid to change. Kind of the running joke in our school a lot of times is we'll work on stuff and we'll work on basic stuff or we'll review and the students are always like, oh, you're changing it on us. It's like, well, I'm not really changing it. We're expanding it. We're trying to make you more applicable to the technique, because it's the technique, but do you know the technique? And it's,
well, I mean, you're also always learning too, and
right.
You're learning past where your master or sensei who taught you knew sometimes. So he knew like this much of the technique this well, and then you can always learn more, and you're not even just learning, you're developing. So it's like, yeah, I the reason why this looks different is because I developed a better technique.
Right.
And I'm teaching it to you now. I am pioneering the art. So don't come to me and act like I don't know what I'm doing. I am developing better technique for you.
If I, knew, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, like you'll do a technique and you'll work it and you'll do it for years and years and years. And then one day you just kind of wake up and you go, what if I did it this way? And it clicks with you. And it's like, God, if only I knew that 20 years ago.
This is what I'm always telling the students. Like I'll get out there and there's some technique, some little nuance, right? I spent my entire life figuring out. And I'll get up there, I'll be in my dramatic pose, and I'll try to say it as succinctly but like beautiful as possible. And they all go, yep, next. And I'll be like, no, not next. That was the synthesis of everything I've been doing for the last 30 years in that one little kernel of knowledge. And they just, yeah, okay, next. And like, we've just gotten so, I think, oversaturated with great, knowledge that we don't realize how difficult it is to add one more piece to that stack, and when you finally do, like, that's like your life accomplishment, but no one will notice it because there's just so much good stuff around them. And I always try to tell my students, guys, there's like rote knowledge, but then there's like tacit knowledge, things that you can only know through doing. And sometimes when I say things, you might not really understand the deep meaning of what I'm saying until like 10 years in the future, when you're reapproaching this technique for the 10,000th time. Yep. And you say, oh my gosh, that's what Master Rose was talking about. That was that little level of detail that I had just, now I see, like the hair on the back of your head will stand up. I've had those experiences a few times with my own master where I'm like, that's what he was trying to get me to do. I threw this technique away 20 years ago because I thought it was useless. I finally figured it out now. What I was doing 20 years ago that was wrong.
Yeah, and on that same note, like from an advice standpoint, like don't be afraid to let your students struggle. Like, too many times, like I see instructors that they keep correcting people like over and over. No, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. You're doing it wrong. It's like sometimes like they know what they want to do. They just got to figure it out. Like, and if they don't have that struggle, there's no sense of reward when they get it.
Yeah.
Like let them struggle and then let them figure it out and get to that pinnacle on their own.
That's where they get that tacit knowledge from struggling, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say the best way to correct a bad technique is to let them do it that way for a while.
Yeah.
Work. Yes, sir.
You sound like you wanted to cut in here, sir.
I was going to ask, what is the most challenging thing you've encountered with instructing?
You know what? I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit on this one. It's the students that's just there, like you love to teach people who want to learn, whether they're good, whether they're quick on the uptake, whether they're naturals at it, it doesn't matter. Like as long as they're willing to listen to what you're saying, it's great. They take the knowledge and they'll apply it. And you guys all know this type. It's that one student that comes in and they have some, nugget of knowledge from something they've done before. Well, that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't work. I would do it this way. Well, if you're that great, why are you here? like I can't. You can do it however you want, but if you're in a particular if you're in a particular discipline and you're learning a particular style, like take what it has to offer. You don't have to apply this to your everyday life. But don't shut the door because it might be worth something to you someday.
Just slap in the back of the head and say, have some respect. Yeah. But no, sometimes you want to do that, And also, you get those students, especially with the grappling techniques. I don't see it so much with the striking. A lot of times when people, it's so easy to do a somewhat intelligent strike. I mean, to you and I's like vision, it's like awful, but for their perception, like, yeah, hit the paddle. Yeah, you hit the paddle with like 0 power, you're hitting with your toe, and it's just all wrong, right? But from their perspective, they don't really know the difference.
Right.
But with the grappling, they can see what they're doing wrong because like, well, I can't get him to submit. Like it's not working, or he's not falling over. And so those missteps become way more obvious. And then what's also really obvious, which is why I brought this up, is, okay, well, you're trying to do a hip throw. If I drop my hips and I just kind of sit on the ground, how do you hip throw me? It's like, yeah, like I have to get my hips under you to hip throw you. That's the situation that hip throw is useful. You know, if you're sitting on the ground, I'm not going to pick you up, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, and also that's kind of the counter. Like I'll go for, you know, like a rear dump or something like that when you're trying to do a hip throw. That's kind of the counter. So, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're first learning the first technique. Then we learn the counter to that and the counter to that and the counter to that. And you got to have the patience as a white belt to take your time and learn the techniques before moving on to the next thing.
Right. Yeah. At that point too, you see a lot of people where they will always want to rush to the end, right?
Yeah.
The throw is the part where they hit the mat, and it's they miss everything in front of it, and they just want to get to that end result, which, you know, makes their technique suffer in the end, and makes it frustrating for them.
That's so wise. That's definitely true. I like how you said that too, because it's like everyone thinks that the throw is the goal, right? But there's so much on the way up to that throw that they're missing out on. It's like the knuckles hitting the pad is the very end of the motion, but everything before that, starting with your core, starting with your feet, coming up through the ground into your core, down your arm into the target, determines how that end result lands, you know? Absolutely.
100%. I mean, it's interesting, like, you know, this conversation is interesting because, like, even though, like, all these different disciplines, it's like the themes are the same.
Yes. The physics is physics. The human body only has a certain number of limbs, and we generate power very similar ways, whether we're striking or we're throwing, you know. Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, this is an interesting shift of topics. So I think every martial art, the founder of that discipline had certain skills, right? We're all different people, right? We're all going to be good in different ways. And whatever his skills were, because in the East, they didn't do a lot of intermixing of ideas and techniques. They didn't do a lot of cross-discipline sparring and stuff like that. Whatever those were, they manifested to the maximum degree, right? So with like Taekwondo, for example, the concepts were maintaining center line, pivot, extension, economy of motion. These are sort of the founding principles of Taekwondo. And I think we have a lot to say about that in Taekwondo. But like, you know, every discipline has its own things. In Judo, for example, like if I push you, you want to resist, which is a way that I can get to actually you come towards me, right? That's sort of a Judo principle. Or if your arm, and some of this might be similar to Aikido because it comes out of Jiu-Jitsu, and they both, you know, very similar in that mindset. But like if you're closer to your arm's closer to me, I have more leverage over it. If you're further away from me, I have less control. You have more control, right? So what are some of those? I mean, maybe I said too much, but what are some of the founding principles of Aikido? Some of the things that Morihei may have kind of pioneered and refined that really set Aikido apart from other disciplines.
Yeah, you know, Aikido really has three principal foundations. Body displacement, you know, pivoting, moving out of the way. Circular motion, so making sure that like everything is like a wave. And then breaking balance. Like those are the three principles of Aikido.
Nice. And when you say body displacement, you mean moving your body offline, off center, so that you can evade the attack and sort of intercept it?
Correct.
And I think that is probably that in the circular. I mean, breaking balance, I feel like that's also in Judo, but I don't think the body displacement you're talking about is so much incorporated into Judo too much. And the circular motion, there are some circular motions in Judo, but I feel like that's sort of a unique Aikido thing. As a layman, what do you think?
There is. I mean, there's definitely some circular motion. It's more pronounced in Aikido. You can definitely, like, if you watch any form of Aikido, whether it's Aikikai, whether it's Tamiki, like you're going to see very prominent circular motion.
Yes, sir.
Not only from the footwork, but when they're throwing, like there is a definite arc throws as they're being conducted.
That's definitely something I've noticed with what little I have seen of Aikido. I am personally very interested in those martial arts styles that are so deeply rooted in that circularity. I have not ever trained in it, but it's on my list is Bagua Zhang, and Bagua is all circles and creating circles within circles. And when I first saw it for the first time, I picked up a book. It's called Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body by Bruce Francis. And he's a Qigong guy, he's a Tai Chi and a Bagua master. And I didn't know what Bagua was. And he mentioned it, and I said, what is this that he's talking about? And I went and I looked it up, and I said, oh my gosh. And there's just something so beautiful about that circularity in a defensive situation. You were talking earlier about soft blocking, right? And that is a concept that if you don't have somebody teach that to you, it's not that's not an inherent thing. If somebody hits you, you're going to go, oh, and you're going to try to catch whatever that is that's coming your way. But the moment you switch to redirection and using that, whatever it is coming in, that is something that has always piqued my interest in the martial arts, and something that I want to continue to dive into, just to see how deep it goes and how far you can take that principle. It gets me really jazzed up, really excited. And yeah.
Talking about principles, it sometimes when martial arts go down one road too far, they can get a little bit out of reality. And so sometimes people think that's a bad thing. However, like the traditional martial arts, in my opinion, are kind of like a case study on like one principle to a super extreme degree a lot of times. And then mixed martial arts kind of somewhere sits in the middle of all of these spokes of the wheel. But I think a lot of mixed martial arts are really missing out on the power of traditional martial arts and the knowledge and wisdom that they actually hold, because you can only really understand that principle when you draw it out to its maximum length, and then you discover things out there that no one else had discovered before. I'll give you an example in Taekwondo. Before Taekwondo, just like karate, like Muay Thai and all these other disciplines, we used to generate the power from the ground up into our kicking technique. And, we step on an angle, we kick across, all this kind of stuff. Taekwondo realized that you can just pivot and you can make tons of power. And in fact, you can pivot and you can extend your leg and you can make tons and tons of power. And so you don't need the ground. And so you can do things like a tornado roundhouse kick, which doesn't use the ground to generate power. It uses your centrifugal motion to generate the power. And it's because of Taekwondo that you see kicks like the tornado roundhouse kick, like the spinning hook kick, which really didn't have a strong place in the martial arts before those techniques were drawn out to the nth degree. The spinning hook kick is the #1 knockout kick out there. It's so powerful. It's really effective for knocking people out. And it wouldn't have ever been pioneered if we hadn't started to go down that road of like, let's not be rooted in the ground and let's explore this one principle of pivot and extension to the maximum. Other examples, I'm sure there's examples of that in Aikido, where it's like, certain things that, Judo practitioner or Jiu-Jitsu practitioner would just sort of be like, okay, move on to the next thing. But if you drew it all the way out, there's some wisdom down here that they're really missing in that.
Yeah. Nick, you want to start off?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you can just kind of go back to the founding of Tamiki Aikido. I think that's the same principle. A lot of traditional Aikikai or really fundamental Aikidoka, they look at Tamiki style, or some people call it Shotokan, or the Aikido of Tamiki, as not Aikido, right? Because it's competition, right? So that's the fundamentals of Aikido is harmony and balance and working with your opponent. And Tamiki has randori, like that's not Aikido. That's combative. That's against the spirit of what we're doing. And so I think there's a divergence there, right? Just kind of how you're saying is one side kept, for lack of better terms, they kept the spirituality of it, and they kept it inward. And they wanted to keep that lineage and that tradition where it was. And then the other side, they took it and they said, well, yeah, we have competition, but it's competition to make each other better. So is that still not harmony? Is that still not, within the spirit of Aikido? So even though it's divergent, it's just expanding the philosophies of one side and the other. And I think kind of to what your point is there's going to be some techniques and some movements and some things on this side that maybe to this side, somewhere along the way, it's going to come back together, and it's going to be like, whoa, we're putting it back together, and now you're creating this whole different thing and this whole different approach to it.
So when I left the karate program and I started going back to my taekwondo competitions, and I was like blocking people at a high level of play, like world champions and stuff, and they had never seen someone block a technique and counter with a punch before. When you guys started doing judo, and you're coming from your Aikido background where you do a lot of similar things, but you're kind of drawing things out in a different direction sometimes. Were there techniques that, like, the judo guys were like, whoa, like I didn't think you could do that in this situation that was coming from your Aikido background?
I mean, maybe not to a great extent. So there's one kata in particular in judo called the Goshin Jitsu. It's the Goshitsu Kodokan Judo. And it's funny, judo is the primary practitioner of the Goshin Jitsu, which is, again, another set of techniques. And the funny thing is the Kodokan Goshin Jitsu was developed by Kenji Tamiki after he studied Aikido. So he kind of went back to judo and he said, hey, here's what I learned in Aikido. Let's develop a practice set for it. So it was funny because we would practice it in judo and they're like, you do it this way, you do it this way, you do it this way. And I'm like, are you sure? You sure you do it exactly like that? Like, if you just make this one motion with your hip, or you just, redirect it just a little bit, and they're like, what, why would that work? I'm like, well, because it was developed by an Aikido guy. That's why.
Sensei Alex, what about you? Or any thoughts on that?
I mean, similar to that extent. I mean, it's interesting because as we kind of teach, and I'm sure you guys have very similar situations. Like your breadth of technique is pretty large, and you practice your foundations and you practice your practical stuff. In Aikido, especially, we have katas that are, they're stylized katas. They're set motions, set scenarios, and every once in a while we'll field questions where it's like the movements we're doing are stylized. Their practicality at times can be questionable at best. And you'll have students ask like, well, why do we practice this? It's like you're not practicing the practicality, you're practicing the techniques. So what you're practicing, while you will never use this in a self-defense or practical situation, the principles that you're performing of body displacement, circular motion, and balance breaking are all derived and created to give you a way to safely practice those things to make your practical techniques better. And it's like, sometimes you kind of have to explain that sometimes what you're not everything you practice is going to be practical.
Yeah, it's like, well, why learn to block like here when you could just go here? And so because you're learning to use your whole body and generate your whole body into that block, so it's maximally powerful, right? Whereas if you just go lift your hand and go like that, every person's just going to go like this and they're going to have no power because it's not starting from the core. They're not using their whole body into it. So sometimes you need to draw things out into a really dramatic. There is some benefit to drawing things out in a really dramatic way, so you learn to use your whole body. It's the same thing with the stances. I feel like traditional karate stances and taekwondo stances is like they teach you how to open up your hip, how to develop strong legs and base yourself out. In reality, they're probably going to be a little bit higher, but there's some deep truth to those deep stances.
Yeah, you're never going to go to a sparring competition and punch somebody in a horse stance.
Yeah.
But
horse stance,
from a practice standpoint, it builds up those muscles.
Yeah. But a horse stance is really good. Like if you get like standing side control on somebody, you're basically in horse stance, right? You know, and when you get your hips aligned with someone else's hips and you're doing a hip throw, that's horseback riding stance, you know? So it has its moments, but you just got to find them, you know?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Guys, it's been a pleasure having you on. I think we could talk for 2 more hours, to be honest, but I know your time is valuable, and it's been great catching up. I really wish you guys the best with your Aikido club. We might have to have you come out for a seminar, or you should invite me to come visit sometime. I'd love to see what you guys are doing out there.
I was gonna say the urge to like, you know, just like get up and start practicing during these conversations it's palpable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I need to grab some fabric all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, if we're ever in the Texas area, like I'll definitely look you guys up. If you guys or any of your students are in Milwaukee, like
absolutely
look us up, reach out, like, you know, feel free to swing by. Like doors are always open to extended friends and family.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Likewise. All right. Well, thank you so much. For any final thoughts, guys, before we let these 2 wise men go with all of their knowledge? You know, we can't let it slip out the door.
As you said, sir, I feel like this conversation could just keep going.
I feel like I understand. Sorry.
And I think that it will. You know, I would love to have you both back on in the future just to dive into Aikido, but also just to keep talking martial arts. You know, that's part of the reason we do this show is because it is so fun to just sit down and say, let's just talk about this. Let's really just open it up. And Sensei Nick, as you said, it just gets your body in the zone of, okay, like, let's get out there. Let's start working on some of these things. Let's, you know, what were we talking about again? About that soft blocking and things like that. So thank you again for coming on.
I actually have a question I want to ask both of you guys, but I feel like we don't have the time for it because it's going to open a massive can of worms. But the fact that you two have been training together for like 30 years is incredible.
Yes, sir.
And like you stuck together through all these adventures. It's like, I have brothers. I have a younger brother, an older brother. My younger brother came and worked for me. It was wonderful, but it's not always perfect harmony, you know? And it's incredible that you guys are that close and you're that understanding of each other. You've been able to be, you know, your stalwart defenders through 30 years of training. We got to have them back on and talk about this. I think this is a really cool topic. And I think there's a lot of kids.
I don't feel bad about hurting him. That's how it works.
Sorry, what is it?
I don't feel bad about hurting him. If I hurt somebody else, I feel bad. If I hurt him, it's like,
It's time.
Truth comes out at last. No, I'm kidding.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
guys. Thank you so much for coming on.
all right, continued
for having
success,
us. It was
Rising
a
Phoenix.
pleasure.
Best of luck.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Likewise.
So long.
Have a good
Bye.
one, guys.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.